They're her family, her only son and his ambitious wife, who locked her out of her own house while she was recovering in rehab. They thought she was too weak, too confused, too old to fight back. But they forgot who held the original deed. Now she's rewriting the ending, one legal blow, one sealed envelope, one lock at a time. This is Veronica Martin's revenge. Quiet, calculated, and absolutely unstoppable. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. They forgot I had a key once, and a title twice. The key turned, but the bolt wouldn't slide. Veronica Martin paused, confused for only a moment before the chill of comprehension crept over her like a draft from under the door. She tilted her head, tried again, slower this time, the teeth of the metal catching with resistance that hadn't been there before. The deadbolt held its ground, unmoved by the familiar hand that once turned it every day for over 3 decades. She pulled the key out and held it in her palm, studying it as if maybe it had changed shape in the 31 days since she'd left for rehab. But it was the same key she had left with, the one she had used since 1991, when she and her late husband moved into the split-level ranch on Mayflower Drive. A house with faded blue shutters, too many rose bushes, and a back deck they built together with their own hands. Something else caught her eye then. A small, yellow, sticky note, curling at the corners, carelessly taped beside the doorbell. It was the kind of note used to remind someone to pick up milk, not to explain betrayal. Her fingers trembled just slightly as she peeled it off the doorframe and read the words in neat print handwriting, Janie's, unmistakably. Please call first. We're trying to keep things calm around here. Mark and Janie. Veronica stared at the words until they blurred, not because of tears, none had come, but because of something more numbing. She looked down at her hands, still strong despite the pins in her hip, still capable of holding a pen, a cup, a house key, yet apparently no longer qualified to open her own front door. Her breath slowed, cooled by the October air that was heavier than it should have been. The porch creaked beneath her as she took a step back, the motion sensor above flickering to life and washing the front stoop in sterile yellow light. There was no movement inside, no sound, just the sharp scent of fertilizer from the neighbor's lawn and the distant hum of a leaf blower winding down. She stepped down to the concrete walkway and turned slowly toward the driveway, her eyes scanning the house like a stranger assessing someone else's property. There were new blinds in the upstairs windows. A potted fern had replaced her old wicker chair. A faint pink ribbon fluttered from the mailbox post. Baby on board, she thought grimly. The sign hadn't been there when she left. Settling into the driver's seat of her dusty Toyota, she glanced at the dashboard clock. 6:57 p.m. She turned the engine off again and sat in the darkening silence, the weight of her thoughts pressing down harder than her own body's post-surgical pain. She waited, foolishly at first, then stubbornly. An hour passed, then 2. Her fingers numbed from the steering wheel's cold. Porch lights flicked on in the neighboring homes. Curtains shifted, dogs barked and were hushed. But from her house, there was nothing. At exactly 9:47 p.m., she gave up. Not because she lacked strength, but because even steel bends if you hold it over flame long enough. The motel was 7 minutes away, past the strip mall and the shuttered bowling alley, tucked behind a gas station that always smelled faintly of burnt oil. At the front desk, the clerk didn't ask for a reason or a story. He just slid a keycard across the counter and pointed to room 107 with the kind of weariness that implied this wasn't the first time someone had walked in from the dark with too much pride to explain. Inside, the room welcomed her with the bitter tang of bleach masking something older, more permanent. She dropped her bag on the carpet and lowered herself onto the edge of the bed with slow precision, every joint chiming its discontent. She didn't unpack. She didn't cry. She just sat there, staring at the dark window as if expecting her reflection to offer some answer. Her purse was still zipped. She reached for it absently, fingers brushing past her phone, pill organizer, and a pair of tangled earbuds she never used. At the bottom, beneath a crumpled tissue and an unopened envelope from her bank, her hand closed around something cold and plastic. She pulled it out. A black flash drive, taped over carefully, labeled in her own handwriting, unmistakable, elegant, deliberate. Backdoor title, 2020. Copy. Her thumb ran across the label, slow and certain. A smile, small, steady, and just a little sharp, tugged at the corner of her mouth. Let's see who really forgot, she murmured to no one. At 3 a.m., she pulls out a flash drive labeled Backdoor Title 2020 Copy. They acted like my recovery was a burden. I'd carried them for 40 years. The glow of the motel's bedside lamp buzzed faintly, its yellow light pooling across the rumpled floral bedspread like a dim, tired sunrise. Veronica sat upright, legs tucked under her bathrobe, the television off, the silence in the room settling like dust. Her laptop balanced on her thighs, warm against the ache in her healing hip. The motel Wi-Fi stuttered and wheezed, but the page finally loaded. She typed in the address of the county assessor's portal, her fingers slower than they used to be but no less precise. As the search bar blinked, waiting for a parcel number or name, her breath shallowed. 3 years ago, when her hip had given out and surgery became non-negotiable, she'd signed paperwork through a haze of pain meds and hospital lights. Mark had insisted it was just precaution. Temporary, he'd said, because banks could be a hassle and power of attorney was too dramatic. Janie had called it smart. Veronica had been too tired to argue, too focused on walking again to look beyond the next physical therapy session. She typed in the address, 2125 Mayflower Drive. Her thumb hovered over the enter key. Then she pressed. The screen blinked, then loaded. Owners, Veronica M. Martin, Mark A. Martin, joint tenancy joint. Tenancy. The words stared back like a slap wearing a suit. Veronica leaned back slowly, her spine pressing into the creaky headboard. She blinked once, then again. There it was. Her name, still present, still first, but no longer alone. No footnote, no timestamp, no mention of a temporary agreement, just her and her son, as if he had built it alongside her. Her fingers clicked through to the deed history, pulling up the last recorded transaction. July 2020, the summer of her first surgery, signed while she was on a walker and still relying on him to get her to the bathroom in time. The signature was hers, all right, steady, though she remembered nothing about the pen she held that day. She closed the laptop with a softness that came not from calm, but from calculation. Outside, a semi rumbled down the highway, its tires dragging across the asphalt like thunder through a cracked sky. Inside, Veronica stood, moved toward her purse with the kind of deliberateness that turns old women into legends. She pulled out her phone and scrolled past contacts she hadn't used in months, some dead, some disappeared. Then she paused at the name she hadn't dialed since before the fall, before the hospital, before any of this. Evelyn S. Bartley, Estate and Elder Law. The photo beside the name showed Evelyn mid-laugh, holding a glass of red wine at Veronica's old 4th of July cookout. They'd known each other through church back then, the kind of woman who read contracts the way other people read scripture. Veronica hit the call button and held the phone to her ear. It rang once, twice. Voicemail. You've reached Evelyn Bartley. Please leave a message and I'll return your call during business hours. Beep. Veronica didn't hesitate. Her voice came low, firm, with the kind of steel that once ran this family. Evelyn, it's Veronica Martin. I need to reverse something I never meant to make permanent. I still have the old documents, title, trust, all of it. Call me tomorrow, please. It's time. She ended the call without saying goodbye. Her reflection in the motel mirror stared back at her, softer than she remembered, but not weaker. Her gray curls were flattened from sleep. The bruise on her collarbone had yellowed to the color of old corn, but her eyes, they were the same ones that talked doctors out of bad decisions and convinced banks to extend lines of credit during lean years. She knew what a co-owner meant in court, and she knew what it didn't. A door could be locked, a bed could be replaced, but equity didn't lie, and the paper trail in her fireproof box had more truth in it than her son's promises ever did. Outside, the neon motel sign buzzed and sputtered in the fogged-up window. Inside, Veronica opened her laptop again, her fingers already navigating to her email drafts. Veronica calls her old estate lawyer and leaves a voicemail. It's time to reverse what I never meant to make permanent. They said it was for my safety. Funny, I never felt more unsafe than locked out by family. The phone rang at 8:03 a.m. Too early for a social call, too late to be accidental. Veronica stared at the screen for a full 3 rings before answering, her finger hovering like a pendulum above the decline button. Mark. Not son, not favorites. Just Mark. "Hello?" she said, her voice calm, as if he hadn't changed the locks on the only house she'd ever owned. There was a pause on the other end, the kind that weighed more than silence should. She could hear ambient noise, maybe a blender, maybe the hum of a refrigerator, the soft, domestic background of a kitchen that used to be hers. "Mom! Hey!" he said, with that strained brightness she recognized from the time he totaled her Buick in high school and tried to pass it off as a pothole's fault. "We were just about to call you." "You did call me." She adjusted the thin motel pillow behind her back. Her hip was flaring again, but she didn't wince. "Go ahead." "Okay, look, before you get upset, we didn't change the locks to hurt you," Mark began, already on defense. "We just didn't want you getting confused or wandering at night. You've been through a lot. We thought it was best for your safety." Her safety. The words landed like frost on glass, harmless until they crack everything beneath. Veronica closed her eyes, picturing her front door again, her note, her name, still on the deed, but not on the key. "That's interesting," she said slowly, "because I've never felt more unsafe than when I stood on my own porch holding a key that didn't work." Another pause. Then Janie's voice broke in, sharper, faster, always ready to clean up his messes. "Veronica, please, it's not personal. We've got so much going on right now. I'm in my 3rd trimester. The nursery's halfway finished. We just needed a little space and quiet. You understand, right?" Veronica looked at the chipped veneer on the motel nightstand. A coffee stain had formed the shape of an open palm. "Did you get any mail for me?" she asked, her tone shifting like a curtain drawn in a dark room. Janie hesitated audibly. "Mail?" "Yes," Veronica said, keeping her voice level. "Any packages? Legal envelopes? Certified letters?" Mark jumped back in, trying too hard. "I mean, we didn't really pay attention. There might have been a couple things. But we figured you were resting." "Resting," Veronica echoed, then let silence wrap around them like thick fog. She didn't fill the gap. She let him sit in it. Mark cleared his throat. "Look, if you need something, just tell us. Don't make this a thing." "I already told you what I need," she replied evenly. "My name, my key, my mail." Another beat passed. Veronica could hear a dog barking faintly in the background. Probably that yappy terrier Janie had insisted they rescue and then left untrained. Someone turned off a faucet. A cupboard slammed shut. "I'll be picking up my legal mail in person next week," she said, and her voice had that tight edge it took 30 years of teaching public school to perfect, where authority doesn't shout, it simply does not move. "Okay, well, hang on. Maybe we should all talk about this," Mark said quickly. "I mean, there's a way to—" "Thank you, Mark," she cut in, her voice suddenly as soft as it was final. That's all I needed to hear. Before he could respond, she ended the call. She sat very still for a moment. Then she turned to the small desk against the wall, opened her laptop, and began typing a list on the Notepad app. To do: retrieve mail from Mark's confirm last known title, update schedule in-person review with Evelyn check P.O. Box renewal. She stared at the blinking cursor, then added one more line beneath the others. Take back the house, quietly, completely. Outside, a garbage truck banged its way down the alley behind the motel. She listened to it grind and groan, metal teeth crushing weeks' worth of what people thought they could discard. She leaned back, satisfied. Mark stutters. Veronica ends the call with, "Thanks. I'll be picking up my legal mail in person next week." They boxed up my things. I'd already boxed up their timeline. The air inside the storage facility smelled of dust, old cardboard, and something faintly metallic, like time itself had a scent, and this was where it came to be archived. Veronica paused just inside the steel corridor, letting her eyes adjust to the dim overhead lights, the kind that flickered like bad memories. A low hum echoed off the concrete floor, and the metal walls made every footstep sound like a closing door. Unit 118 was near the back, tucked between an RV-sized locker and a row of forgotten seasonal decor. She pulled her cart behind her, wheels squeaking with every turn like an old woman clearing her throat in protest. This place had always been her backup plan, her just-in-case tucked away behind a chain-link gate and an 8-digit access code no one else knew. Not even Mark. Especially not Mark. The key to the padlock was still on the ring she kept separate from her house keys, the house keys now rendered useless, though the betrayal still felt fresh on her skin. She slid the lock free and pulled open the roll-up door, the metal grinding upward with a low groan, like the unit itself was reluctant to wake. Dust motes danced in the slanted morning light. Veronica stepped in, the concrete cold beneath her soles even through her sneakers. The air held a stillness she recognized immediately, not abandonment, but preservation. Along the back wall stood the metal file cabinet, the drawer. Labels were still intact, her handwriting sharp and steady from a decade ago. House. Legal. Trust. Taxes. Beneath the cabinet sat a fireproof box, the edges scuffed but the lock intact. Next to it, 3 banker's boxes, sealed and stacked neatly. One was labeled "Before Mark" in black Sharpie, a private joke she hadn't thought about in years. She knelt beside the cabinet, the motion slow and deliberate. Her hip protested, but she ignored it. This wasn't a day for comfort. The top drawer slid open with a satisfying snap. Inside, neatly filed manila folders, tabs in perfect order. She thumbed through them until she found it. Original deed, 1989. And beneath that, refinance, 2003, and then temporary title edition, 2020. She pulled the last one out and flipped it open. There it was, in black and white, her signature scrawled during a post-op haze, and Mark's, far more confident. Next to it, a notarized letter from a mobile title agent she didn't remember meeting. No mention of time limits, no expiration clause, just a subtle trap written in legalese. She placed the file on top of the cabinet and reached for the second drawer, Trust. Inside were the documents she and her husband, Michael, had updated 3 years before his heart attack. His handwriting still danced in the margins, arrows, underlines, the occasional "Ask Evelyn." Together, they had planned for contingencies, not betrayal. Her hands moved with purpose now, pulling each document she needed and stacking them methodically beside her. Deed, trust, financials. The paper trail that proved ownership wasn't just a matter of keys or comfort. It was built in signatures and bank records and decades of unpaid labor no one had the right to erase. She was closing the bottom drawer when she noticed it, wedged between 2 hanging folders, hidden but not forgotten. A thick envelope, yellowed with time, sealed and weighty in her hand. Her name was written across the front in Michael's blocky print. No address, no date. Just 5 words in the center, "In case they forget who built this." Her fingers froze. She ran her thumb over the ink. She hadn't seen this before, not when they sorted through his things, not even during the weeks of grief-fueled filing and cleaning that followed the funeral. This was tucked away, deliberate, left not for the moment of mourning, but for something else entirely. She sat on the crate beside her, envelope resting across her lap like a resting heartbeat. She didn't open it. Not yet. Some truths deserved silence first. She finds a sealed envelope from her late husband labeled, "In case they forget who built this. They locked me out of a house. I unlocked 32 years of equity." The envelope trembled slightly in Veronica's lap, not from her hands but from something deeper. Beneath its flap, she could feel the weight of Michael's foresight, the silent power of a man who had built a life brick by brick and expected it to be honored long after he was gone. She didn't open it, not yet. Instead, she gathered the papers, original deed, updated trust, the title she never should have altered, and slid them into a canvas folio with practiced precision. The air inside the storage unit felt heavier now, filled with more than dust and time. It felt like momentum. Like leverage. By noon, she was back at the motel, sitting cross-legged on the stiff mattress, her laptop open and Evelyn's name highlighted in her email inbox. She clicked the call button. One ring, then two. "Veronica," Evelyn said, her voice clipped but warm. "I saw your voicemail. I was hoping it wasn't what I thought it was." Veronica didn't answer immediately. She watched the cursor blink beside the subject line of a new document she'd been drafting. Petition for quiet title. "I have the original documents," Veronica said finally, "and I have proof I wasn't mentally competent to understand what I was signing that summer." Evelyn's sigh came soft, but not surprised. "Mark added himself during your post-op window, didn't he?" "He used my pain as cover," Veronica replied. "He did it with a smile and a box of Jell-O cups in his hand." There was a pause, then the sound of rustling paper on Evelyn's end. "I've seen worse, and I've reversed worse. If you're ready to take this to court, I can begin the quiet title process today." Veronica's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. The steam curled around her knuckles, grounding her. "Do it. You'll need to file an affidavit explaining the circumstances. Medical backup helps. Mental clarity documentation is gold." "I have rehab records," Veronica said, "and a letter from my therapist confirming cognitive strain during recovery. Also, I haven't contacted him since I left." "Good." "Don't," Evelyn said firmly. "Once we file, it's best to let the paperwork do the talking. This isn't a confrontation, it's a correction." A flicker of something unexpected lit in Veronica's chest. Not relief. Not yet. Something harder. Something hotter. She clicked through. A series of old downloads found a scanned letter from her primary physician dated July 22, 2020. The language was clear. Post-surgical medication, temporary memory lapses, limited executive function. She forwarded it without hesitation. Evelyn responded almost instantly. "This is more than enough to show diminished capacity. Give me 2 hours to draft the petition." 2 hours later, Veronica opened her email to a PDF titled Quiet Title Action, Martin v. Martin. The words sat on the screen like an arrow notched mid-flight, her name on both sides of the slash, but only one side belonged in the house. She scrolled through the document, her eyes grazing over phrases like unjust enrichment, constructive fraud, unilateral coercion. It read like a legal battle cry wrapped in velvet. Precise, devastating, final. The final page required a digital signature. Veronica signed it. She hit send. By dusk, the motel room was bathed in gray light. The shadows had stretched across the floor like limbs too tired to move. She sat with her hands resting on her knees, her breathing steady. The laptop pinged. A new message from Evelyn. Subject: Filing confirmed hearing date set, November 12th, 9:30 a.m. Please avoid contact with Mark or Janie until ruling. Let the law do its job. Veronica didn't reply. She closed the laptop, stood slowly, and walked to the window. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the torn motel flag against the pole. Leaves danced like something freed from expectation. They had locked her out with a single deadbolt. She had just filed to remove them from 32 years of equity. The war had started quietly, but Veronica had learned to love silence. Lawyer emails her, "Hearing date set. Please avoid contact until ruling." They didn't want me at the party. I RSVP'd to the courthouse instead. The scent of microwaved oatmeal and motel bleach hung heavy in the room as Veronica scrolled through her phone, thumb steady, face blank. She hadn't planned to look, but curiosity has a way of prying open even the most carefully guarded windows. The first photo hit her like a slow breath against glass. Janie, radiant in a gauzy lilac dress, stood barefoot in Veronica's dining room, cradling her belly as if she'd conceived royalty. Behind her, the walls Veronica had painted herself, sunbeam cream with dove-gray trim, now bore a string of "Welcome Baby" letters taped slightly crooked above the antique mirror she'd inherited from her grandmother. A guest in a peach maxi dress had tagged the location as Home Sweet Nest with a heart emoji, and the caption, "Such a warm, cozy vibe today. Couldn't love this family more." The phrase kept echoing. Warm, cozy, family. Veronica's hand stilled. The ceramic cup of coffee on the nightstand had long gone cold, forgotten in the hum of betrayal. Her mouth was dry, her throat hollow. She didn't cry, she just kept scrolling. Another post. A woman she barely remembered, Lori something, held a plate of cupcakes shaped like rattles. Janie really outdid herself. This space is so her now. Her. As if the home had been reborn without its original mother. As if wallpaper and pregnancy pillows could erase 32 years of memories baked into that foundation. The echoes of school lunches, Thanksgivings, and Michael slow dancing with her on that very kitchen tile. Veronica exhaled through her nose and tapped into Janie's story. The camera panned across the dining table, the maple one that had survived toddler tantrums and teenage report cards, now dressed in pink tablecloths and floating candles, surrounded by laughing faces who didn't know, or didn't care, that the woman who had bought that table wasn't invited to sit at it. The next frame was a boomerang of Janie opening a tiny sweater. Cheers erupted. Veronica turned up the volume, just enough to hear Mark's voice off camera say, "It's perfect, just like our little family." Something in Veronica's chest shifted, not like something breaking, but like something sharpening. She stood, walked across the room to her folio, and unzipped it. The papers were still in perfect order. Deed, trust, title transfer forms, certified proof that the name above the door, at least legally, was hers. The baby shower was unfolding in her house, on her terms, whether they knew it or not. And somewhere between a Pinterest mocktail and a stack of diaper raffle cards, the truth was going to find a crack to slip through. She sat back down, reopened Instagram, and tapped on the most recent post, a group photo in front of her fireplace, Janie in the center, Mark behind her, arms around her belly like he was claiming territory. Veronica hit the message icon. She attached a photo, a high-res scan of the original deed, her name and Michael's bold and unmistakable at the bottom, stamped and notarized, dated 1989. She typed only 2 words, "Still mine." Her thumb hovered, then pressed send. The message disappeared into cyberspace, quiet and invisible. A minute later, the story vanished from Janie's feed. Then the main post was set to private. No reply came. But none was needed. Veronica placed her phone on the pillow beside her and leaned back against the headboard. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the silence settle again, thicker now, full of potential. Let them smile for the photos. Let them toast to a future they think they've secured. The courthouse had already RSVP'd to Veronica's return, and this time she wasn't asking for permission. Veronica replies to one post privately with a picture of the original deed. "They treated me like a squatter, but I signed the mortgage. Twice." The accusation came wrapped in cowardice. An email, not a call. Not even a subject line. Just a string of cold sentences from Mark, forwarded from an AOL account Veronica hadn't seen since 2005. "We're concerned about Mom's mental state. Post-rehab behavior has been erratic. We believe she may not be capable of managing property or finances at this time. We're requesting an emergency review of title control until her stability is confirmed." The email had been sent to Evelyn, copied to some clerk at the county courthouse. Janie had even chimed in with a one-line note, "This has been hard on all of us, especially the baby." Veronica read the message 3 times, not because she didn't understand it, but because she needed to feel every word land. One after the other, like small, strategic betrayals. They weren't questioning her paperwork. They were questioning her. The woman who had raised him. The woman who taught him how to tie his shoes, pay bills, check oil levels, and defend himself against a 6th-grade bully. That woman, they now claimed, might be too unstable to own her own home. She had signed 2 mortgages, co-signed his college loans, paid Janie's first car insurance when her parents forgot. But now, she was being recast as an unreliable narrator in her own story. Veronica closed her laptop and stood slowly, her hip tightening with each breath. The cheap carpet scratched against her bare feet, the air inside the motel pressing like a held-in apology. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached for the small leather folder that held her medical paperwork, the one she had brought to every physical therapy appointment like it was armor. At the back of the folder was a business card, creased but intact. Dr. Leslie Hartman, LCSW, Senior Cognitive Wellness, Licensed Therapist. Veronica hadn't spoken to Dr. Hartman in weeks, not since their last telehealth session. She'd called it graduation, as if recovery had a cap and gown. Now she needed something more than affirmation. She needed record, authority, the cold-blooded language that institutions respected more than memory. She dialed. "Veronica?" Dr. Hartman answered, surprised but kind. "You okay?" "I need something official," Veronica said without preamble. "They're trying to say I'm not well enough to manage my own property. I need you to say otherwise." Dr. Hartman didn't ask for drama or detail. She just said, "Give me 2 hours." The letter arrived by secure email just before dinner. 1 page, 3 paragraphs, signed and certified. "After multiple evaluations and sessions, it is my professional opinion that Ms. Veronica Martin is of sound mind, with no cognitive impairments. She is fully capable of handling legal, financial, and residential matters." Veronica read it twice, then opened a new email window. She attached the letter, addressed it to Evelyn, the judge's clerk, and, without a second's hesitation, added Mark. The subject line was exact: clarity, not confusion. She didn't write a single word in the body, just hit send. The response was fast. Within an hour, Evelyn replied with a short message. "Perfect timing. We'll submit this to the file tomorrow. Don't respond to anything they send from now on. Let the judge see it unfold." Veronica leaned back in the stiff motel chair, the letter still open beside her. The heater groaned to life across the room, blowing warm air that smelled like lint and old pennies. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment. They had tried to recast her as unstable, weak, a woman lost in her own mind, but the truth had teeth, and now it had a signature. Just as she stood to pour another cup of decaf, her phone buzzed again. Not Evelyn. Not a reply from Mark. It was from Janie, a single text. "We didn't mean for it to go this far. Can we talk?" Veronica didn't reply. She walked to the window instead and watched the cars pass on the highway, headlights splitting through the dark like choices yet to be made. She forwards the letter directly to the judge's clerk with the subject line, "Clarity, not confusion." They thought they were above the law. The law showed up for me. The walls had ears. And at City Hall, they had file numbers too. Veronica sat in her car outside the planning and zoning office, the engine off, windows cracked just enough to let in the damp autumn air. The municipal building was unimpo, flat-bricked, vaguely beige, but she knew the power it held: permits, citations, the kind of quiet authority that didn't need confrontation to collapse someone's timeline. She stepped inside with her canvas folder under one arm and purpose stitched into every footfall. The fluorescent lights buzzed above like impatient witnesses. A woman behind the front desk looked up from her screen, startled by the intensity behind Veronica's otherwise calm expression. "I need to file a concern," Veronica said. "Property at 2125 Mayflower Drive. There's remodeling underway. I believe it's being done without permits." The clerk didn't ask for proof, just slid a short form across the counter and clicked her pen. "Are you a neighbor?" Veronica smiled politely. "No," she said. "I'm something more permanent than that." The nursery was Janie's big project. She'd posted about it for weeks. Swatches of muted pinks, curtain samples, a baby animal mural she claimed to be painting by hand. Veronica remembered the floorboards in that room, how she and Michael had sanded them themselves, laughing and swearing through the fumes. They'd sealed them with 2 coats of polyurethane and the naive belief that nothing permanent could ever be undone. Janie's latest post showed a half-knocked wall between the nursery and the guest closet. Dust everywhere, no masks, no permits visible, and now, thanks to Veronica, a red flag on file. 3 days later, the first city inspector showed up. Veronica didn't have to be there to enjoy it. The updates came from a different source this time: Ms. Fletcher, her old neighbor 2 houses down, a widow with binoculars and strong opinions. "They looked panicked," Fletcher whispered over the phone, as if Veronica were hiding in a closet somewhere. That blonde city inspector asked for a permit. Mark got red in the face and kept saying it was just minor upgrades. Janie went back inside and slammed the door. You should have seen the way she was holding that baby registry clipboard like it was a shield. Veronica chuckled softly, the kind that vibrated at the back of the throat but didn't quite reach the lips. Did they stop the work? Oh, honey, you know they did, Fletcher said, and the inspector said she'll be back next week. The second visit happened on a Tuesday. This time there were 2 inspectors and a clipboard full of questions. Veronica didn't need Ms. Fletcher's binoculars to imagine the scene. Janie standing in leggings, barefoot and annoyed, trying to explain why there was fresh wiring exposed and no licensed contractor on record. Mark, for once, stayed out of the photos. The third visit included a ladder and a structural engineer. Veronica watched from the motel window as she refreshed the online code enforcement page. 1 open complaint. Status: active. Pending investigation. Her phone buzzed with a photo from Ms. Fletcher, a bright orange notice stapled to her front door. Stop work. Pending structural review. All construction must cease until official inspection is completed and permits issued. Failure to comply may result in legal action and fines. Veronica enlarged the image until the paper filled her screen. Her front door, her wreath, now slightly crooked, framed by city power. It was bureaucratic poetry. She saved the photo to her camera roll and stared at it in silence. They had used her absence to build something. She'd used their ambition to pause it. The game had shifted again, only this time the house wasn't just divided, it was frozen in place. A notice is posted on the front door. Pending structural review. They weaponized my absence. I used their arrogance. The courtroom smelled like floor wax and old fabric, like a place that scrubbed everything except memory. Veronica stood at the edge of the oak-paneled world, spine straight, hands folded neatly over a folder of documents that could crack the foundation of everything Mark thought he'd built. Across the aisle, he looked smaller than usual. Not physically. He still wore that same oversized button-down, the one that made him look respectable in photographs, but emotionally. Shrunken. Like a man unsure of his footing but too proud to admit it. Janie didn't come. That much made Veronica's breath settle lower in her chest. It was better this way. Court was for facts, not theatrics. The bailiff called the case, Martin versus Martin. Petition for quiet title. Ms. Martin, the judge said, glancing over his reading glasses. You're the petitioner? Veronica rose. Her voice when it came was steady but without aggression. I am. And Mr. Martin is here as... Mark stood, clearing his throat with performative discomfort. Respondent, co-owner, son. The word hung in the air like smoke from a match that had already burned out. The judge motioned them both to sit. Let's begin. Veronica opened her folder. Slowly. Deliberately. Your Honor, I've submitted the original deed from 1989, the trust Michael Martin and I updated before his passing, and the documentation showing I temporarily added my son's name during post-operative recovery in 2020. I've also included medical statements confirming I was under cognitive impairment at the time of that change. She slid the packet across the table to the clerk. The sound of paper against wood was sharp. Surgical. Mark's lawyer, a two-tan man with gelled hair and a nervous shuffle, stood next. Your Honor, we don't dispute the mother's ownership, but we argue that she's no longer capable of maintaining the property alone. My client acted in her best interest. Did he notify the county before changing the locks? The judge interrupted. The lawyer hesitated. No, sir. That was a safety decision. Veronica didn't smile, but inside, something opened. Mark stood again, this time without prompting. She's not safe alone. She was in rehab. She falls. She gets confused. The judge turned to Veronica. Ms. Martin, can you speak to that? Veronica nodded. I submitted a letter from my licensed therapist confirming my current mental and physical competency. I live independently. I've paid property taxes for 32 years, and I was never declared unfit, only recovering. The judge tapped his pen. And these medical logs? They show my medication levels and cognitive recovery, none of which justify the removal of my right to enter my own home. Mark's lawyer shifted again. Your Honor, our concern isn't about malice, it's about the future. There's a baby coming. This isn't just a property. It's a home for a growing family. Veronica didn't look at him. She looked at the judge. It was a home for a family. I built it. My husband died in it. My name was always on it, until a temporary decision was twisted into permanence. A hush settled over the room, the kind that falls right before thunder. The judge leafed through the packet slowly, lips pursed. When he spoke, his voice had lost its earlier impartiality. It carried weight now. This is a clear case of confusion being exploited, he said. The court sees no valid reason for the co-ownership to remain in place pending full review. He looked directly at Mark. You made unilateral changes without legal authorization. You removed someone from their residence during a medically vulnerable period. That is not protective. That is opportunistic. Then he turned to the clerk. Ms. Martin, the judge said, his tone final. The court recognizes your exclusive right to this property pending title resolution, effective immediately. Veronica exhaled, quietly, like a house finally breathing after too many months of being boarded shut. She rose, gathered her folder, and nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. Mark didn't speak again, but she saw the look in his eyes, the slow realization that this wasn't over a room or a key, it was about power, and he'd just lost the one piece he thought he'd secured. Judge says, Ms. Martin, the court recognizes your exclusive right to this property pending title resolution. They didn't think I'd come home. I slept in my own bed with the ruling in hand. The new keys felt heavier than the old ones, cool, solid brass, still warm from the locksmith's hand when Veronica curled her fingers around them. She stood at the threshold of the house with the court order folded neatly inside her coat pocket, the weight of the document steadier than her breath. The locksmith gave her a quick nod, unaware of the history clinging to the very hinges he'd just updated. Everything's changed out, ma'am. You're the only one with copies. Good, she said softly. When he left, she stood in silence for a long moment. Just her and the door. Her fingers brushed the trim, wood she had stained herself years ago when Michael insisted they could do it better than any contractor. The memory flickered and passed, not sentimental, just steady. Then she turned the new key in the lock and stepped inside. The house greeted her like it remembered, that faint mix of lemon polish, aging floorboards, and something else. Her. A scent she hadn't realized was missing until it returned. Not lavender, not perfume, just lived-in paper, warm wood, and familiarity. Nothing had been cleaned. Mail was stacked on the entry table, her name on half of it. Dishes still in the sink, a pair of tiny pink socks crumpled on the coffee table. A stroller leaned haphazardly against the hallway wall like a guest who'd overstayed without asking. She made her way through the rooms slowly, reclaiming space with each footstep. Her bedroom still had her quilt on the bed, though the pillows were different, firmer, not hers. She peeled them off and replaced them with the set she brought from the motel. The blue floral ones Michael used to tease her about. Too cheerful for sleeping, he'd said. By sundown, she had vacuumed the hallway and folded every blanket in the living room just so, not out of obligation, but control. The tea kettle hissed on the stove, the same whistle that had once summoned her to mid-morning crossword, puzzles and late-night check-ins with Mark when he'd stumble in from college break. Now, it simply marked her return. She carried her mug to the front porch, the hot chamomile steaming up into the cool dusk. The porch swing creaked gently beneath her as she settled into it, wrapped in a wool shawl, legs crossed, mug steady in both hands. A blue jay landed on the railing and tilted its head at her, curious. She smiled at it. That's when the headlights swept across the yard. Her gaze didn't waver. The black SUV slowed to a stop at the edge of the driveway, too far back for confrontation but too close to be casual. Veronica didn't need to squint. She already knew the shape of it, the way Mark drove like he was always late even when he wasn't. He didn't get out. Inside, she imagined him gripping the steering wheel. Maybe Janie was beside him, maybe not. Maybe he thought he could talk his way through this, reset the board like he always had. But this wasn't a conversation anymore. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a copy of the court order. She placed it gently on the porch railing next to her tea, the official seal catching the light of the porch lamp. A gust of wind rustled the trees, sending dry leaves skittering across the front lawn like scattered intentions. Veronica took a long sip of her tea. Still, he didn't move. She didn't either. Just the two of them. Him, parked in the shadows. Her seated like the last chapter of a novel he didn't write. Mark drives up as she's sipping tea on the porch. He asked if we could talk. I asked if he could listen. The porch light cast a faint golden pool around Veronica's chair, a gentle halo in the early darkness. She didn't shift when the SUV door finally clicked open. No glance toward him, no startled acknowledgement. Just another sip of tea, measured, silent, intentional. Mark walked toward her with hands in his jacket pockets, each step heavy on the gravel. His breath fogged in the air, but his voice, when it came, was tight with something more fragile than anger. "Mom, can we talk?" She nodded once. Talking's allowed. He looked for a place to sit but didn't find one. He stayed standing, like a boy who knew he wasn't welcome to stay too long. "I didn't come here to fight." "I didn't invite you to," she replied calmly. Mark glanced at the porch swing beside her but didn't dare ask. The wind brushed through the hedges, rustling dry leaves like whispers trying to escape. "Look," he started, rubbing the back of his neck. "We were overwhelmed. Janie was pregnant. You'd just gotten out of the hospital. Things were messy." Veronica lowered her mug to her lap and studied him, her eyes unreadable. "You changed the locks without a phone call. That's not messy. That's intentional." "I was scared," he said. "You were falling, confused. We thought—" "You didn't think," she cut in, voice still low but with weight behind it. "You decided. And you decided I was in the way." He looked down at his shoes. "I didn't mean it to go so far." She leaned back against the swing. "But it did." He tried again. "What if we worked something out? I stay on the deed. We talk about cohabitation, maybe a live-in nurse, shared expenses. I mean, it's not like we wanted to throw you away." Veronica's laugh was short and dry. "You threw away the spare key and left a sticky note." Mark stepped forward slightly. Okay, I get it. But you can't just erase me like this. I've been helping around here for years. I did repairs, You paid for groceries twice," she said, "and you recocked a window frame I asked you to leave alone. The rest, Michael and I built this. I refinanced. I carried the taxes. I signed the mortgage, twice." He stopped speaking. She reached to her side and pulled a folded packet from the small table beside her tea, legal papers, neatly clipped. "This," she said, handing it to him, "is the updated estate plan. You've been removed. From the title." From the will, Mark's eyes flared. "Permanently?" "For now," she said. "That's the difference between you and me. You made things permanent when you thought I couldn't fight back. I'm showing you what temporary looks like when you earn it." He opened the packet, scanned it, jaw twitching with every line. "I don't know what to say," he muttered. Veronica stood slowly. Her knees cracked as she rose, but she didn't wince. She stood taller than him in presence, even if not in height. "I didn't ask for an apology," she said. "I asked you to listen." He nodded, shoulders dropping. "So, what now? You want me to disappear?" "No," she said. "I want you to start over." He blinked. "Where?" She turned back toward the door, her hand resting briefly on the frame she once painted sky blue. "You can rebuild trust," she said without looking at him, "but you'll do it from a rental." And then she went inside, closing the door with the same steady grace that had always defined her, not slamming it, not locking it too fast, just closing it. With purpose. She ends the conversation with, "You can rebuild trust, but you'll do it from a rental. They tried to evict me. I evicted their entitlement." The locksmith returned on a Friday morning, this time without small talk. Veronica met him at the front door with a quiet nod and a thermos of black coffee. He didn't ask questions. He knew better than to pry into the kind of silence that carries its own weight. She stood in the hallway as he worked, the rhythmic click of tumblers resetting echoing against the hardwood. Each turn of the wrench was a small exorcism, banishing hands that had no business holding her house hostage. By the time he was done, 3 doors bore brand new locks, each keyed solely to the 2 identical copies in Veronica's coat pocket. One would stay on her keychain. The other, she tucked inside the fireproof box in the hall closet beneath old tax returns and photographs Michael once organized by year and emotion. She stood on the porch as the locksmith drove off, then turned to face her house again, not as a battleground but as a sanctuary resecured. Inside, she walked to the nursery. Or what had been the nursery. The space was unnaturally quiet now, stripped of the laughter and pretend futures Janie had tried to paste onto its walls. A faint outline of the mural remained, two deer mid-leap, heads half erased, like they'd been startled into fleeing the scene. Veronica didn't look away. She stepped into the room, fingertips grazing the edge of the white crib, still fully assembled, still unused. She called the women's shelter that afternoon. "Are you in need of nursery items?" she asked. The woman on the other end sounded both surprised and grateful. "Always. Do you have anything in good condition?" Veronica's eyes moved around the room, crib, rocking chair, unopened diaper genie, an entire stack of baby books still shrink-wrapped. "Yes," she said, "everything is in excellent condition, it just doesn't belong here." The volunteers arrived 2 hours later in a squeaky white van. Two young women with ponytails and quiet smiles carried each item with reverence, as if extracting ghosts with padded gloves. "Can I ask what prompted the donation?" one of them asked gently. Veronica didn't flinch. "Let's just say it was built on borrowed time." By the time they were gone, the room felt lighter. Empty, yes, but whole, in a different way. She stood in the center and listened to the silence. Not absence. Closure. In the following days, she rehired her old gardener, signed a part-time caretaker to help with winter prep, and reset every forgotten corner of the house with surgical precision. Towels were restocked, drawers cleaned, light bulbs replaced. It was less about restoration and more about reclamation, giving the house back its voice, one drawer and hinge at a time. On Monday, she walked to the mailbox and found an envelope addressed to resident. Inside, folded neatly in thirds, was a copy of the most recent property tax summary, standard annual notice. She took it inside and sat down at the kitchen table, where Mark had once spilled orange juice across her mortgage paperwork during a tantrum about calculus homework. She flipped open her laptop and opened the scanned folder labeled Taxes, Paid by VM. Every year since Michael's death. Property tax, covered in full, quietly, without fanfare, never split, never requested back. She hadn't just been holding the deed, she'd been holding the entire house upright while they played dress-up in it. She printed out a copy of the last 5 years' receipts and tucked them inside a manila envelope. No note, no venom, just facts. The next morning, Mark would receive it at his new rental. Postmarked, verified, clean. A record of every dollar she'd paid while he stood in her kitchen calling her unstable. Mark receives a bill for unpaid taxes. She'd been covering them for years. "They made plans behind my back. I rewrote them in my handwriting." The pen hovered just above the dotted line. It was a simple black ink rollerball. Nothing fancy, nothing ceremonial, but Veronica gripped it like a scalpel. It would cut clean and deep. Across the table, Evelyn waited in silence, her reading glasses perched low on her nose, a faint trace of bourbon-colored lipstick still holding from the morning. "This is the final version," Evelyn said, tapping once on the folder. "No going back after this." Veronica didn't look at the pages again. She'd read them enough, memorized the structure, measured the impact. She signed. One swift, deliberate signature, then another, then a third. The sound of pen on paper was quiet but permanent, like the scratch of a match that knew exactly what it was about to ignite. The first clause was what you'd expect. Executor assignments, healthcare directives, funeral preferences. Minimal fuss, closed casket, wildflowers if there had to be flowers at all. But it was Section 4 where the tremor really began. All property, financial holdings, and RMI, estate value shall be distributed according to the following. Mark's name did not appear. Not once, not even in a footnote. Instead, Veronica had chosen 3 beneficiaries. The first, her goddaughter Camille, an ICU nurse in Denver who used to spend summers on Veronica's back porch eating orange popsicles and organizing fake weddings between her Barbies and stray acorns. The second, Hearts on Call, a nonprofit that sent certified caretakers to low-income seniors. They'd helped her neighbor through a hip replacement last winter when her daughter couldn't be bothered. The third, a newly created fund in Michael's name, a grant designed specifically for adults over 50, transitioning from physical rehab back into independent living. It would cover rent, groceries, transportation, and therapy. Veronica had seeded it herself with the equity she unlocked when Mark's name was removed from the house. The Michael Martin Reintegration Grant, for those who don't just recover, but return. I'll file it through probate by end of day, Evelyn said, sliding the papers into a heavy manila envelope. Mark will get a certified notice through the court, but if you want to send something directly— I do, Veronica said. I want him to read it before he hears it from anyone else. Evelyn nodded. You're sure? Veronica didn't hesitate. I am. The two women sat in silence for a moment, the room filling with the quiet hum of resolution. Outside the law office window, a breeze pushed through the nearly barren maple trees, rattling the last of October's leaves against the glass. Veronica stood. I used to think changing a will was something you did quietly, she said, in a moment of anger or pettiness. And now? Now I see it's something you do to protect what matters most after anger has burned itself clean. Evelyn smiled. And what matters most? Legacy, Veronica said, slipping her coat on. Not just where the money goes, but where the memory lands. Back home, she printed a copy of the revised will and tucked it neatly into a padded envelope, addressed in her familiar, slanted cursive. Mark Anthony Martin, C.O. Willowbrook Apartments, Unit 4, C. She didn't include a letter. There was no need. She simply sealed the envelope, walked it to the mailbox at the end of her drive, and slid it inside. The metal door clanked shut. As she walked back toward the house, the wind carried the faint smell of pine mulch and chimney smoke, signs of a season shifting, as if the house itself was finally exhaling. Veronica paused at the front steps. She looked back at the mailbox, still and silent, then up at the roofline she had once painted with Michael on a dare. They had made plans behind her back. She had written a future in her own name. She files the new will publicly and mails Mark a courtesy copy. They used my recovery as their entry. I used it as my resurrection. The folding chairs were metal and unforgiving, but the room hummed with quiet warmth. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, softened by decades of water-stained ceiling tiles, and someone had brewed strong coffee that smelled like survival, burnt, bitter, and still somehow comforting. Veronica stood near the front, a worn podium between her and 20 pairs of eyes, most of them female, all over 60. Some held canes. A few had compression gloves. One woman's walker was decorated with purple yarn pom-poms that bobbed each time she shifted her feet. These weren't strangers. These were versions of her, people who had returned from hospital beds and rehab centers only to be met not with homecomings, but hesitation. I wasn't confused when I left rehab, she began. I was recovering. There's a difference. A hush fell across the room, like someone had turned down the static of self-doubt. They changed the locks, she continued. They told me it was for my safety. What they meant was, my absence was more convenient than my return. A few heads nodded. One woman's mouth drew into a hard, understanding line. They used my healing as a doorway, Veronica said, but I used it as a blueprint. She spoke for 20 minutes. Not as a victim, as a witness. She told them about the silent kinds of theft, not of jewelry or cash, but of agency, of presence, of how you could go to rehab to learn to walk again, only to come home and find your place already taken. She didn't name Mark. She didn't have to. She spoke of signatures she'd signed too tired to read, the quiet erasure of dignity when people call you unstable for asking questions. And then she spoke of reversal, of titles taken back, locks changed again, wills rewritten. The applause didn't roar. It rose, slow and sure and full of something heavier than noise. Afterward, as she sipped lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup, a woman in a peach windbreaker approached her. Her voice was raspy but steady. "You should come back," she said. "We've got more women like you, a lot more." Veronica raised an eyebrow. "Like me?" Not angry, not bitter, just awake. Behind her, another woman chimed in. "They listen when you talk. Maybe because you're not trying to impress anyone." "I gave that up a long time ago," Veronica replied, half smiling. Someone from the community board, a man in khakis and a staff lanyard, stepped in. "We're launching a mentorship pilot, women over 60 helping others transition post-rehab, some practical, some emotional. You'd be perfect." Veronica blinked. Mentorship? She thought of the days she'd spent wondering who to ask about power of attorney reversals, who to call when her locks no longer matched her keys, who to trust. There had been no one. Not then. She sipped her coffee. "I'd consider it," she said. "Under one condition." The man looked up from his clipboard. "What's that?" "I get to teach them about real estate too. Deeds, titles, equity. No one talks about that part, and that's where the real damage happens." He grinned, almost startled by her precision. "Deal!" Veronica nodded once, the corner of her mouth tugging upward. Not quite a smile, but something close. Before she left, she walked the back hallway of the center alone, her shoes echoing against the vinyl floor. On the bulletin board, someone had pinned a hand-drawn sign in bright marker. "Rehab isn't the end. It's the restart button." She stood there longer than she meant to, the phrase circling her thoughts like a gentle dare. Outside, her car waited in the fading afternoon light, and inside, a new beginning had been named aloud for the first time. She accepts. Only if I can teach them about real estate too. They changed the locks while I was healing. I changed the title while they were dreaming. The folding table wobbled slightly on the uneven grass, but Veronica steadied it with a folded coaster like she'd done 100 times before. The sun beamed low and wide over the backyard, warming her shoulders through the linen of her blouse. She hadn't worn white since the funeral, but today it felt right. Not in mourning, in reclamation. A pitcher of orange-infused water gleamed like stained glass in the center of the table, flanked by fresh bagels, deviled eggs, a mason jar filled with lilacs, and a warm spinach quiche still steaming on its ceramic tray. Camille, her goddaughter, had brought scones and a laugh so unfiltered it made the birds pause. "Veronica, is this your grandmother's tablecloth?" someone asked. She looked down at the faded floral print draped across the table. "It's older than Mark," she replied with a smile. "And more useful." Laughter rose like wind chimes in spring, soft, high, unpredictable. Around her were 6 women from the community center, each having survived something, each balancing plates on their knees and stories on their tongues. They were different shapes, shades, backgrounds, but they shared the same kind of strength, the quiet kind you earn back piece by piece. From the porch, music played low, Etta James drifting out of an old Bluetooth speaker Veronica had finally figured out how to sync. The swing creaked gently in the breeze, and the sound was no longer haunting, just familiar. Her phone buzzed beside her glass. She didn't rush to pick it up. She let it buzz twice more. Then she reached for it with deliberate calm, thumb unlocking the screen. Email notification. County Recorder's Office. Subject, property record. Final update. Filed 8:06 a.m. Owner of record, Veronica May Martin, sole holder. She read it once. Then again. The words didn't sparkle or sing. They just stood, like bricks in a wall no storm could shift. She pressed the phone face down on the table, but not before Camille caught a glimpse of the screen. "Is that it?" she asked, voice hushed like a child catching a secret. Veronica nodded once. "Your name alone?" Camille asked again, a smile creeping in like dawn. Veronica's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "Mine, alone, again." They toasted with lemon water and bite-sized muffins. Someone said something about legacy. Someone else complimented her hydrangeas. But Veronica sat in the center, letting it all pass over her like warm rain. No speeches, no monologue. Just a life put back together the long way. As the sun climbed higher, a breeze rolled in from the west. Cooler, calmer. A few yellowed leaves drifted from the dogwood tree. One landed on her plate. She didn't brush it off. Inside, the mail sat unopened. There was no longer any urgency, no battles waiting on her desk, no signatures left to reclaim. The only surprise came when she stepped inside to refill the water and noticed the voicemail light blinking on her landline. She pressed play. "Mom, it's Mark. I got the envelope. I read everything. I guess I didn't think you'd actually... Anyway, I'm not calling to argue. Just, maybe next time we talk, we can just talk?" He paused. "I'm sorry." No excuses, just that. She didn't delete the message, but she didn't call back either. Not yet. She returned to the table where Camille was pouring coffee and telling the others about Veronica's mentorship role. "She's not just teaching recovery," she said. "She's teaching women how to own things again." The table murmured with approval, and Veronica smiled, not because it was true, but because it had always been the plan, even when she didn't know it. The screen door creaked shut behind her. Birds trilled above. Someone laughed so hard they spilled jam on their lap. Veronica leaned back in her chair, raised her glass slightly in the air, and closed her eyes for one long, unshaken breath. They had called it cruel. She called it closure. They called it cruel. I called it closure.